and gentlemen, for joining us for another edition of the Free Exchange of Ideas with Donovan and John. We are here to help you out. Now, let's just get to it.
Hey, thank you very much for coming back for another edition of the Free Exchange of Ideas with Donovan and John. Today, we have Alex Ozark, one of my very favorite people, really bright guy, knows way more than we do. And so we finally brought in somebody who's kind of an expert. There you go. So we're going to talk about alternative fuels today. Alternative fuels is a really big subject. We're going to really narrow it down because there's just so much going on. We're going to stick with pretty much hydrogen, some biofuels, electric, and what was the other thing you were going to talk about, Alex?
Biofuels covers it.
Oh, biofuels. Okay. Yeah. So, and my good friend Donovan is going to talk about some nuclear power options, which I just find absolutely fascinating. And there's a neat thing going on in back east. I want to say it's MIT. That might be wrong, so don't quote me. Where they are this close to fusion for nuclear power, which is a whole new ball of wax. Very clean, easier to control once you get the control going. There's a really neat article on that, and I think Alex or Donovan has that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Donovan and let him go ahead and pick whichever he wants to start with.
Okay, well, first of all, and this is something we talked about before the show, is like defining what alternative energy is. So one of the ones I found online, alternative energy is any energy source that is an alternative to fossil fuel. So I think we all agreed that that was a good one. And the other thing I was looking at while we were talking that we haven't discussed was, and I found this fascinating when I looked this up. So renewable energy is the fastest growing energy source in the United States, and it increased with 100% from 2000 to 2018. So
that's awesome.
Pretty quickly. Yeah, renewables made up more than 70% of net U.S. electricity generation in 2018, with the bulk coming from hydropower, 7%, and wind power at 6.6%. So pretty impressive numbers there, especially with you talking about less than 20 years, 100% growth. That's pretty fascinating. As far as industry goes, I know Alex works in that industry, so that seems to me 18 years is pretty impressive for 100% growth. I'd like to hear your feedback on that.
I think it's probably slow in terms of how we think about things now, but when you think about how much the fuel mileage or fuel economy over time has changed, it's probably similar.
In the window of time, you think it's pretty close to that 18-year going from 0 to 100%, or 100% growth, I should say. That's still pretty much 0 to 100% in 18 years. You think that's still pretty comparable to, let's say, the growth of the internal combustion engine?
The internal combustion engine itself, as far as efficiency, it hasn't changed. There's like a maximum amount of efficiency an internal combustion engine can reach, and you can't just double that. So same goes for solar panels. Any energy process has a maximum efficiency that's calculated based on all the processes in it, and you'll never be able to go over that. Solar panels, I think, is capped at some low percentage, 30% or something.
Yeah.
ICE engines also are in the low 40s, something like that. Internal combustion.
Sorry.
That diesel gets close to, but yeah. So we aren't doubling efficiency. We're probably only improving fuel mileage as a result of reducing weight, what else? Rolling resistance, drag coefficient, all those kinds of things.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, because for me, when I was younger, I would work with carbureted engines, which are just notoriously bad at efficiency. When you move from the carburetor to a fuel ejection system with a throttle body and all that good stuff, that engine works a little more efficiently than the carbureted engine. And I think that has a lot to do with how flow is controlled in the motor. Fuel and airflow controlled in that system works a lot better than it does in a carburetor, because you got a big open space and you just can't really do much to cap it off. I am very impressed with, from my Toyota Corolla 1972 Corolla to my 2015 Honda Civic. I was getting about 22 in the Corolla and super happy about it, I admit. But now I'm getting 35 in my Civic. I don't think the Civic weighs any less than the Corolla did. I think it's a matter of making the engine more efficient. Obviously, we can't, like you said, there's a mechanical component to it that you can't get past. You can't get past how much it takes to crank a motor. You can get past the metals, making them lighter, but other than that, there really, like you said, there really isn't much that we can do to make it that much more efficient. It is what it is, just due to physics.
I should clarify, efficiency in this case means energy in divided by energy out, right? Actually, the other way around. So in this case, it's amount of fuel, which has kind of almost a fixed amount of energy,
right,
and how much power comes out at the end of that. Different engines are tuned for power, fuel efficiency, yada, yada, yada. So you can't compare a Honda Civic to a Dodge Charger and talk about efficiency, because their engines are made to do different things with that one little piece of fuel that comes in. So it's a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison, but yeah.
I like that, man. All right, so well, I don't want to. I know you said you were a little bit more versed on biofuels, so I won't talk about that. The one thing I was looking up that I found, and I think me and John even talked about this, but not something we were familiar with, was tidal energy. So tidal energy uses the power of water to generate energy, much like hydroelectric methods, and its application actually has more in common with wind turbines in many cases. It's a fairly new technology with potential, a lot of potential. A report by the United Kingdom estimated that tidal energy could meet as much as 20% of the UK's electricity demands once they get that up and running more. So the most common form of tidal energy generation is the use of the tidal stream. Tidal stream generators, these use kinetic energy in the ocean to power turbines, and without producing the waste of fossil fuels or being susceptible to elements or other forms of other forms of alternative energy. It's like the big thing with it though is environmental impact. They don't know what that does, on a large scale to marine life. So that seems to be the number one concern for it when I was looking that up. What happened to it?
Did they in your
liability?
Yeah, I was gonna say in your searches, did you see? Because I thought I remembered seeing when you mentioned it several years ago in off the coast of Florida and Georgia, they had set some turbines out to get that tidal, and they did the same thing in Hawaii. This is years ago. I have not heard whether it's working still or if they've had to modify it or pull it out because it's done damage to the ocean life. Because the ocean is an extremely sensitive environment. You can't really mess around in it. So I don't know how long that's going to last, or if they're going to modify it and figure out another way to use it. So I'm thinking this
really quick. I got like 5 pros and 5 cons for tidal energy. Tidal energy is clean and renewable. It's predictable and reliable, long-lasting equipment, and effective at low speeds even. So, but the cons for it are, and you got to balance this out of what you're looking for. It's the environmental impact, which we were just talking about. Apparently high construction costs, scarcity of suitable locations is another one, and it's inconsistent. So I'm not going to go into each of those or anything like that. But obviously tidal energy, and I guess most urban areas are located by large bodies of water, typically, if not,
right
on the ocean and seas and stuff like that. So
one of the biggest problems with natural energy generation is the transmission, right? So when you have the big fields here in Altamont Pass or Mojave, you've got these large wind farms, but sending that power through power lines, let's say to Colorado, doesn't really happen. You can't send it that far. So there is a
That's the other thing.
natural problem with natural energy.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the other problem with that is we don't have any way to store it.
Yeah.
If I hear the commercials for, especially here in California all the time, use your power between 4 and 9 because that's when we have that power from wind and solar. But once the sun goes down, start to shut stuff down. It's like, why don't we find a way to store some of that? That's what Tesla has been working on for a decade.
Yeah, and that's what I like about the battery. I mean, when we did the show on the batteries, that's all the energy we're making basically gets almost all of it gets converted to electricity for the most part. Whether we're talking about homes and cars, maybe not all transportation necessarily, but yeah, having better ways to store that energy for longer periods of time. So
Right.
For rainy days, no pun intended. So that was tidal energy. It's a relatively new technology. I think something that countries that have access to that should definitely look at something like that as a power resource. But yeah, looking at the environmental impacts of big one, so definitely something to look at both ways and try to weigh that out, right? So how can maybe there's not so. But definitely something to look at, and then don't. And that's what I said earlier. I like how the industry is so widespread and different focuses.
Right.
As me now, and as Alex said, different energies could be used for different things. So and how to figure that out. So definitely worthwhile. But I think we should move on. So who's got it next? Is that you, John?
Okay. Actually, I was going to let Alex go with
Okay.
because I'd really like to pick his brain about the electric.
I was going to say, I want to maybe focus again on, so we're talking about fuels and we're talking about energy. Energy is produced by burning fuels, or energy is produced by capturing or turning something, in Donovan's case, tidal kinetic energy into electricity. We started out talking about alternative fuels, but an alternative fuel isn't necessarily alternative energy.
Okay.
So just for the purposes of being clear, should we talk about different ways to produce electricity?
We could do that.
That's kind of what
Because there are tons of ways to do that.
Right.
And I would like to see California do more before they ask car companies to turn their entire fleet to electric, especially here in California, because we have trouble keeping the lights on after 9 o'clock. I mean, let's be honest. I've been through, I don't know how many blackouts in my lifetime. I've always lived here in California. So it's not an uncommon thing for me, but we lose when we don't work harder to create the environment we want before the pieces that we want. We want electric cars because they don't burn fossil fuels. I think that's a great thing to focus on. But to get there, we need to have the infrastructure first, right? Same with hydrogen. We have the infrastructure closer to hydrogen than we do to electric. There is some really good infrastructure for electric, but I think the infrastructure for hydrogen is already in place. I actually looked at a map of hydrogen fuel stations. There's a ton of them in the Bay Area. There's like one in the middle of the state down by Fresno. It's not in Fresno, it's actually on the I-5 corridor. And then there's a bunch in Los Angeles, Orange County, and San Diego. So if the car gets the kind of mileage, let's just use a car for example. If the Toyota Mirai, which is a hydrogen vehicle, gets the same mileage as, say, a comparable Camry, then you could travel from station to station. You could fuel up and be a little bit quicker than you would in an electric car. However, as Alex and I were talking earlier, it takes a great deal of electric to separate the hydrogen from oxygen to make hydrogen fuel. And that's a lot of energy being wasted.
Yeah, reading it here on the article is sent, it says research continues to make it more efficient and more cost effective too. So I don't know how expensive that is for hydrogen gas engine car. So that's
Well,
what
and
we're
that's,
looking at.
and Alex and I were discussing that yesterday or day before. And he has a lot of thoughts on it. Are you still there, Alex, or did we lose you?
Yeah, I think it was the
There
day
he is.
before.
Okay, day before, yeah.
You're really using some sort of energy, electricity, natural gas, usually electricity from natural gas, to do that splitting and then creating hydrogen gas from that. It'd be far more efficient to just take that electricity and drive a car with it, as opposed to taking that electricity, splitting some molecules, and then driving on those split molecules. So that's the part that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I don't want to get into this one right yet, but
yeah. But I think we can talk about energy, alternative energy sources, and and how that, the different sources we're looking at and how that can be used. I was thinking charging batteries, right? So to charge the batteries, for the times when you don't have access to solar or wind and stuff like that, you have these batteries in your home to charge your house, to power your house and whatever you need to get done.
We have to stick with one. We can't keep flopping between energy and fuel. We have to pick either energy or fuel, because it's too confusing.
Okay. All right. Well,
Hydrogen is a fuel, not an energy.
Yeah.
more time, Alex, I didn't catch that.
The article, I sent that article online, the first one, and it goes through the 11 alternative energy alternatives, I guess. So, yeah, I actually, I would look at, as we talked about, alternative energy sources, I'd say for industry and home, but I don't know what John wants to talk about. So,
yeah, I think that's a good segue to solar, for example.
Sure.
Solar is something we hear all the time, right? It's an energy source that's getting a lot of backing. I think wind is similarly pervasive in that regard, but solar, let's see, solar has come up in efficiency, just an individual solar panel, from about 13% to about 20% a year ago. That reduces, if you look at all the energy needed to power just the United States, that's gone from an area of 20,000 square miles to 10,000 square miles just by having that efficiency increase. In just thinking about how much available rooftops there are, consumers can take up somewhere between 20 and 30% of that 10,000 square miles just by putting solar on their roof. So we could cut 20 to 30% of all US energy needs right by putting solar on our house. That's huge. And that's, that would be a big reduction in the amount of energy we would need. And then we turn into a microgrid, right? Instead of what you're talking about, John, where you have these blackouts all the time. Now you're sort of self-sufficient. It does require a storage source for it to truly be self-sufficient. And that's where those batteries come in. There are a couple other storage sources of energy, including a flywheel, maybe a pressure tank. So you take energy, compress air or some other source, and then you release it slowly and get energy back out.
You could use that as a turbine. If you're compressing air and then letting it out slowly, you just run it past a turbine, and that turns into electricity for your house. Or
that's exactly, yep, it's exactly what it does. So
right, and that's my plan. When we move, I'm going to turn my place into solar panels on the house and the barn, solar panel in a field, and I'm going to build a water wheel if we have a creek, or I mean a decent river. I'm going to build a water wheel. I want to be able to tell whatever the power company is there, they don't need your help. Thanks.
Oh, that's a whole nother bag of chips with deconnecting from the grid.
Right. I mean, I could let them leave it hooked up, but if I can not use it, if I have solar and I have a way to store that energy and I have the water wheel to.
I
Hold
heard
on,
that
just a
too.
second.
What was that?
Hold on, just 1 second.
Oh, I thought he was deep in thought, but something
I
else
heard,
happened.
I heard something. It wasn't. It might have been a knock or something. So how you been, man? What have you been doing?
Pretty good.
Sorry about that, guys. I thought somebody had messed with my door handle, which meant somebody's on my property.
I heard something too.
Yeah, okay, so it wasn't just, yeah, but I ran out there, I didn't see nobody, and so I'm not gonna worry about it anymore.
This is turning into a haunted story.
I hope not. I don't have patience for that today.
It's the ghost of fossil fuels.
Right. Anyway, so yeah, so that's what I'm going to do with my house when we get there. That's my plan over the next probably 5 or 6 years, is to get all of that laid out and placed down. Because when we sell here, we're moving to a place where we're not going to have a mortgage. We'll be able to buy it outright and have a little bit of land. Right now we sit on about an acre. We're looking at getting somewhere between 15 and 20 when we move. If the prices stay pretty consistent across the board, we'll be all right. And I'll be able to do those things. And I mean, I'm really, really interested in that. I love hydroelectric. I think hydroelectric, especially if you get it on a river or on a dam, you know, you're talking about consistent usage, and it'll last a long time, and it stores well. It doesn't require a lot of maintenance. That's the nice thing about it. You put in a couple of good bearings, you're good to go.
So unless you're having a bad drought.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Well, you know, where we're moving is pretty drought resistant. It ain't California. So hopefully we're going to be all right. And we'll have a
Yeah,
nice
well, the federal government
can finally come to me. What'd you say, Donovan?
I said the federal government just put restrictions on the Colorado River because the water flow has been so low.
Yeah,
First time ever.
Yeah. I guess the point is rivers aren't fault proof because
Oh no, they're not.
of
But-
the water source.
Right. And I mean, I expect to be able with the solar, I expect to be able to, you know, not worry about that. If it doesn't have enough water in you know, one spring or summer season, I'll be okay with the solar.
I'm more actually of all things, I'm more of a nuclear power guy.
Yeah, that's an alternative energy. But an alternative fuel in the form of biofuels is really twofold. One is going to be your gasoline replacement, and that is going to be your diesel replacement. On the gasoline side, you have your ethanol-based fuels, and your diesel side, you have your biodiesel-based fuels. You also have something called green diesel, which is, in some ways, it's just a renewable form of diesel. That one I don't know too much about, but taking biodiesel, for example.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just wondering how it was renewable, but
Yeah, I have to look into that because I remember there being some sort of word smithing about how they got green diesel.
okay.
I think biodiesel is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it has promise in being very renewable. You can use any oil to create biodiesel. Literally any oil. We talked about hemp oil, flax oil. There was a big push for what?
Use cooking oil.
Cooking oil, exactly.
Yeah,
Vegetable oil, animal fats. I ran biodiesel in my 2003 Volkswagen Jetta. I generally, at the time, you could buy either vegetable oil based biodiesel or animal fat based biodiesel. I would usually buy the animal fat based one just because it had higher energy content.
Okay.
It was always slightly dirtier. And there are big trade-offs with biodiesel. And I think that's something that gets overlooked when we talk about alternative fuels in general,
Sure.
ethanol included. One drawback for biodiesel is that it has less energy content than diesel does. So to go the same distance on 1 gallon takes more fuel with biodiesel than it does with diesel. So you're consuming more of it, right? The second thing is that for many applications of a diesel engine, burning biodiesel will generate more nitrous oxides and less CO2 than the equivalent amount of diesel. Nitrous oxides have a higher greenhouse gas potential than carbon dioxide. So you're actually worsening your emissions problem. This is something that takes a lot of education and understanding why this is potentially a worse option than
I didn't know that.
Diesel.
I had never heard that. The only thing I really heard about biodiesel was that you had to keep the tank warm or it turns into gel and you can't get it to flow. But you have
generally have to keep it over 30, over freezing generally. When it got to winter months, I mixed in regular diesel just so I didn't have to worry about it. But that is a problem. Yeah. That's another drawback.
And I didn't know that was an option to mix fuel like that to actually keep it in a liquid form. It seems like an awful lot of work and an awful lot of extra energy being wasted to keep it, especially like you said, in the wintertime. If you're in Michigan or Colorado or Utah, you're going to spend a lot of money in electricity to keep your tank warm.
Yep. Ethanol has similar drawbacks where it has less energy potential than gasoline, so you're burning more of it. It's generally a cleaner burn though than a biodiesel. But what am I trying to say? It's similarly. What's that?
Basically, it's not as efficient either. Is what it sounds like.
Right. It's not as efficient because it has less energy content.
Clean of burn, but not as efficient as gasoline or diesel or anything else like that.
Yep. And the biggest drawback for ethanol is there high ethanol content is that it's not generally great for some of your engine components. So it'll eat plastics and rubbers and things like this that aren't correctly formulated for it. So you do have to be very careful. This is why there's generally warnings on the pump saying this is 10% ethanol or potentially higher. So there are drawbacks. And I think the way it's going, it seems to me that alternative fuels for transportation use, biofuels, has kind of stalled. The production, the investment has stalled, waiting for something else that's cleaner to take over, whether that's hydrogen or battery electric vehicles. I have here biodiesel production year over year, and let's see, in 2020 it was up, but it actually went down from 2018. Can you imagine that? We actually reduced the amount of renewable energy we created. That's not the normal trend, right? That's very interesting. So it just tells me there's not a lot of interest in this alternative fuel.
But so I'm really interested in, I think, solar and wind, which you probably know a little bit more about than either one of us. Solar energy is really fascinating to me. There's so many different ways to get it now, not just the big plates on your roof, but they got the little shingle thing that Tesla, actually not Tesla, but his brother owns the company that makes Solar City. Yeah, his brother owns that company, and they make those plates with it's Tesla. Yeah, but I've also seen these sunflower looking things that circle and close at night and open up first thing in the morning, like sunflowers. They're 6 feet across and they're on a tall stalk, so you don't have to mount them on your ceiling. You can put them in your backyard at the corner of your fence line, whatever. And they're supposed to be pretty good. I have not, and I want to say that's Kevin Costner. I think he's got his money in that company. And that company's growing pretty nicely. I'm very impressed with them. And wind, if you can get a small not wind generator, but a small wind wheel out here where I live, that comes right across the valley very nicely. The wind does. And we could generate quite a bit of energy out of that.
Yeah, how much output does a small wind turbine have?
Not a great deal. It's a little bit better than the equivalent solar, but not very much. But it has to be consistent. And that's the problem with wind. It's just not consistent.
8 kilowatts, 9 kilowatts. That's pretty good. So you have to put it into context, because if you think about what your roof can generate as far as size,
right?
A small 1,200 square foot house like mine, I'm only going to generate maybe 6-7 kilowatts, maybe 8. That sunflower thing you were talking about probably only generates 1. That's not a lot of energy.
I think it was better than 1. No, it wasn't at the level that my roof or your roof would be. But, and the nice thing about solar on the roof, no moving parts. And that's a really big thing for me when you're talking about energy transfer. The less moving parts to steal energy from your source, the better the more efficient it works for your home. So like, running a turbine, that's great, but you're wasting a lot of energy to turn that turbine.
Well, you're not wasting it.
I'm not getting it.
You're not getting it, but it's already a lot. So 9 kilowatts, and it's coming from the air already. So it's really, you're turning it into heat. While solar panels don't have any moving parts, they're highly inefficient because of the process of the chemical layers and taking the sunlight and filtering it down through those layers. You're losing the energy there as well. So it's more obvious to talk about moving parts and energy loss, but the same is true in solar panels as well. Sorry to rain on your parade, John.
No, that's okay. Because I was going to say that where I get moving parts is, from a car, right? The engine steals a little bit of the energy that's coming into it. The transmission steals even more. The third member steals even more. Tires steal. And then you finally get down to, which is why when you run like a 350 horse engine, you're getting maybe 270 to the ground. That's a lot of loss.
Yeah, but you're correct in that assumption. But when you have a wind turbine, you're just really looking at maybe a gear set and a motor, and electric motors are highly efficient, over 90%.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Versus a solar panel, this is only 20%. So you're getting a lot less loss with a wind turbine, actually.
But I like that idea. I also like the idea of like we were talking about before, water wheels for hydropower. That's actually more consistent than wind, just because that's a river. It's going to run at a pretty consistent rate, and so you can just set your not thermostat. What's the word I'm looking for? Regulator. You can set your regulator, and really not worry about it too much more, unless you're expecting a flood or something. A lot of water comes down, and then you got to pay attention to that. But overall, with the wind, you would actually have to have that electric generator. What do you call it? Motor. Yeah, the electric motor to store up that energy, to properly store that energy to a battery system. Or like in the case of Tesla, that's not, is the Tesla power pack, is that actually just lithium batteries?
The power pack, like the
for the house
wall.
Yeah,
the power wall is literally a Tesla Model S battery pack turned this way.
Oh, really? It is. Oh,
Tesla Model S components. Why am I blanking?
Regulators and that kind of thing, or
coolant stuff. Yeah, it's most of the same components, just packaged vertically.
That's cool.
It's pretty genius.
And
so that means they don't need it. Yeah, they don't need separate parts. It's just they order all the same parts from the same suppliers and they just package it slightly differently. It's genius.
Yeah, I love the idea of the Tesla Powerwall. Whole lot cheaper than batteries, whole lot more efficient than batteries, deep cycle batteries, which is what you were using before. Is you just did a bunch of batteries in series and then pray that you didn't fail one. But in this instance, a lot more efficient. Is that so? That is a lithium battery pack, right?
Yep.
So yeah, a lot more efficient, a lot more stable, a lot more life. So, I mean, they warranty them for quite a long time, right? You're not going to get that kind of warranty out of a deep cycle battery.
That's
So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm thinking.
Well, I'm Donovan, and John's here with us today. Thank you for joining us for the free exchange of ideas, and we'll see you next time on the next show. See ya.